After 4 rounds of the Norway Chess Tournament, Sergei Karjakin was leading with 100%. But in round 5, he faced Magnus Carlsen. If Carlsen could beat him, then the tournament would be wide open again. Let's join their game after 19 moves, and we have a really typical Spanish position on the board. White has slight space advantage with pawns on e4 and d4. Black is a bit more cramped with pawns on d6 and e5. Now in this kind of position, there's great tension, but black must be very careful not to release that tension too early. For example, if black takes here, then you can see that white has a beautiful mobile center with pieces behind it. Also, white must be careful not to exchange here too quickly, because that will liberate black's pieces. Carlsen, with the black pieces, played knight b6. Okay, this looks pretty sensible to control some squares here. Oops, here and here. And now, for example, if white takes immediately, then I don't think he has any advantage at all. That looks, well, it's a symmetrical pawn structure and absolutely fine. Instead, Karjakin tried to use his space. He played c4, and this opens up this diagonal for the bishop. Carlsen should take, of course, and exchange some pieces just to try and ease the congestion in his position and take a bit of pressure off. But now we see that this bishop has reached this diagonal looking at the slightly sensitive square f7. Again, this is very typical Spanish, that this bishop, which so often is sort of behind white's pawns, very often comes into the game and hits f7. So black has to be very careful here. If he takes, again, if he takes on d4, then another bishop comes into the game, and these look too dangerous. So Carlsen is under pressure here. He has to be careful. He played h6. I think that's an understandable move, just preventing a possible incursion from the knight on g5. Now Karjakin took. Now the reason he's doing, and played bishop c3, the reason he's doing that here is to be able to put the queen on b2, to put some more pressure on the pawn on e5. And yeah, this is already very uncomfortable for black. For example, if you try to bolster that pawn with, say, knight d7, then white can take and play knight takes e5, hitting the queen and f7, and, well, black has to give the exchange back. White is doing very well there with these bishops. So Carlsen tried to exchange pieces. Bishop a6, this looks like a sensible decision. Of course, Karjakin wants to maintain the bishop on that dangerous diagonal. And now Carlsen plays c5, trying to exchange pawns. And here, I think if Karjakin were in a less ambitious mood, he could have played this, and this is a lot safer. And white is still a lot better here. But pawns have been exchanged, and well, I think white will win a pawn here by force, but black can exchange pieces. So, for example, here, and this is a safe pawn up for white, but all the pawns are on one side of the board, and black would have reasonable drawing chances here. But Karjakin played more ambitiously. Queen b2, hitting e5 straight away. And now it's very interesting to see what happens if Carlsen takes on b4. White has an amazing initiative now. So those bishops just raking across the board. The queen is attacked. Okay, let's attack the queen again. Okay, we can block that. But now that e-pawn rolls forward, white has this wonderful kingside pawn majority. And now, again, white is just playing kind of kick and run chess. You know, all these moves are coming with tempo, gaining time on every single move. And now queen b3, again, it's that point f7, which proves too weak in this variation. And after this, you can actually take and play e6, and rook d7 is a winning move, I'm afraid. There are some nasty tactics on the diagonal. So, I mean, that's rather typical for this kind of position, actually. So Carlsen was forced to block out that bishop. But he still has problems with the pawn on e5. In fact, he's losing that pawn by force. And at this moment, it looked absolutely terrible for Carlsen. It looks like he's losing a pawn. He has a poor position. I mean, this pawn is securely blockaded, going nowhere. This is potentially dangerous. Let's see what happened. Somehow Carlsen managed to organize himself. This is the start of his comeback. Karjakin took the pawn with the knight. Maybe bishop takes is safer, but this looks absolutely fine for white. I mean, it looks terribly strong, actually. Bishop b7. So now there's a bit of pressure here. The bishop came back, and now rook e8. And suddenly, just within a couple of moves, although Carlsen is a pawn down, he's managed to coordinate his pieces. And, you know, you can see there's a lot of pressure directed against the pawn here. And now a very committal move from Karjakin. I mean, this looks terribly strong. You know, I mean, I was watching the game and I just thought white was doing extremely well here. But bishop d6, and I mean, there's real tension now in the position. And here it's very easy for white to go wrong, and Karjakin misjudged the position. But it's tough. For example, now he needs to be able to move this knight back, but these pawns are under fire. If he tries g3 to support the f-pawn, then black can actually sacrifice the exchange here. This is really dangerous. And now c3 and rook takes, and you can see that the white queen is cut off from the king side. And suddenly, well, we'd rather have these pawns back here. And, you know, maybe black is threatening something like rook g5, maybe just taking on e4. This is extremely dangerous for white. I mean, maybe the best move is to play rook e3 with the idea, perhaps, of g3, so supporting g3. But, I mean, it's not easy to determine what's going on here. Karjakin played king h2, which proves to be a mistake. He'd clearly overlooked something. Knight h5, hitting the f-pawn. g3, now f6. The knight has to move. And here I can imagine that Karjakin was only expecting black to take on e4. And after some exchanges, well, probably the game will end in a draw. Even there I slightly prefer black, but odds on it's a draw. But instead, Carlsen took on f4. Now this came as a real surprise to Karjakin. The point is this, that if the knight's taken, let's say g takes f4, then black gets an absolutely vicious attack. So for example, king h1, we take on e4, and these bishops are just destroying white here. And after this, well, black is a whole rook down, but the bishops and the queen are just too strong. It's going to be mate very soon. Well, there are other variations which are quite pretty, actually. Let's have a look at this. For example, if knight takes, well, one of the bishops is gone, but there's a very nice motif here, and that's f5, just making room for the rook to come here and then attacking white's king. So Karjakin had to do something pretty desperate. He took on d6. Now, if the rook is taken, then white can capture the knight on f4, and there's no problem. So knight takes g6, rook takes, and rook takes. So black has won his pawn back, even material on the board. But this position is very promising for black. Again, it's to do with the king. There's no cover on the second rank, no pawn cover, that is. And along these diagonals, there's real trouble for white. So, for example, I mean, I've probably Karjakin, well, it's very difficult to defend this position, but let's just make a random move here for white. b5, push the b pawn. Now h5 is very strong, just prizing open the diagonal. And you can see once again the queen is offside, just not able to help with the defence. Karjakin played bishop d4. And now came f5. So again, just opening up the diagonal. There's pins here, but of course it's also to do with this. We want to open up this diagonal for the queen. And if queen c3, let's say, and trying to blockade that pawn and keep the long diagonal closed, then we can see that black can use the other diagonal and exploit this pin, and the knight comes in on f3. Beautiful idea. So Karjakin played e5, but I think he must have missed this next move. Knight takes e5. Beautiful tactics. Well, the simple one is if rook takes, then queen c6, and there's going to be mate on one of these squares. Karjakin took with the bishop, and although black isn't winning back the bishop straight away, in fact, well, he is getting the bishop back very soon. I mean, it's absolutely forced. First of all, mate is threatened here. If bishop f5, then you can just take here, and if rook takes, there's mate on h1. After the game, Carlsen thought that bishop e4 was maybe the only chance for white, just closing the long diagonal. But he thought that after rook e7, just with the idea of spinning around here, should be winning for black. Remember, there's still problems on this second rank as well. So rook g1 played, defending g2 and h1, and queen d5, and here black wins the bishop back by force, because there's a threat of mate here, and if the bishop moves, that's also winning. So bishop takes f5, rook takes e5, and now it's all over. White just can't defend against all threats. Bishop g4 was played, h5, and that's really uncomfortable. The bishop just doesn't have a good square here. Carlsen was hoping for this, and then he could sacrifice his queen. It's not very complicated. Threatening a mate on h1, and if the king tries to escape, then h4 just keeps the king blocked in, and rook h1 mate on the next turn. Bishop d1 was played. Now c3 is a nice move. And if, let me see, if queen takes c3, then queen a2 check is winning. That weak second rank. So if something is interposed here, then, well, you exchange and play rook e2. So queen f2 played, and now, well, there's no defense to black's initiative here. Queen f7 threatens this one. Well, that gives the king a square, but actually it opens this diagonal, so it's just another avenue for attack. If queen takes, then queen f2 is mate, and queen g3, queen a2 wins. So queen d4, and after queen c7, very attractive winning move, just hitting this diagonal. Karjakin resigned. If rook g3 to try to close that, then, well, there are a couple of winning moves, but I rather like h4, and that wins the rook here, but there's also rook e1 threatening rook h1 mate. It's interesting to see how well Carlsen played when he was under pressure, how well he coordinated his pieces. So, after 5 rounds, Karjakin is still leading with 4 out of 5, but Carlsen now has 3, Nakamura has 3, so just a point in it with 4 rounds to go. It's anyone's tournament.